Welcome to the Support is Sexy podcast. I'm your host, Elaine Fluker, executive coach for high performing women. Join me for inspiring conversations with over 500 women leaders around the world as they share how they excelled in their careers or launched successful businesses and the important role that support played along the way. Because as we always say, having it all does not mean doing it all alone. Here we go. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Support is Sexy. I'm excited to have you here. You know, it just would not be the same without you. And today I'm excited to welcome our guest, Marcia Dawood. Marcia is the author of the book Do Good While Doing Well. She's also a TEDx speaker and host of the Angel Next Door podcast, where she interviews angel investors and helps her listeners learn more about how people got started investing. And Marcia's not just talking about it and interviewing people. She walks the talk. She holds investments in over 50 early stage companies and funds. And she's committed to expanding support for diverse companies that overcome the world's biggest problems and accelerate positive change. She's a venture partner in Mindshift Capital and a member of Golden Seeds, which is one of the largest angel groups in the U.S. And that's the thing that Marcia talks to us about in this episode of Support is Sexy. She shares with us what it means to be an angel investor, what even is an angel investor, how does it work, and why it might be more accessible than you think. I will share with you, investing in companies, especially startups, small businesses, women-owned businesses, is something that I've been doing a lot more lately and looking into how can I get more involved, how can I support companies that I believe in, that maybe they'll turn into a big company someday. But even if they don't, I'm happy that I invested what I could and helped this entrepreneur who's trying to create some kind of change I believe in this world. So this is great for you if you're someone who's thinking that way. Where can I put my money so it really matters to me? And also, if you're an entrepreneur, which I know a lot of you are, and you're someone who's looking for investing, or you might be considering looking for investments potentially, this is a great episode for you too. Because Marcia shares what angel investors typically look for, and we mention also some online platforms that you can consider to have access to more potential investors. So we're covering both sides here, angel investor and those who might be wanting to get in contact with angel investors. The thing is to make sure you have as much information as possible to build your business or to contribute to another business. And really, you know what it's all about, support each other. All right, so now without further ado, here's my conversation with Marcia Dawood. So Marcia, thank you so much for joining us for an episode of Support is Sexy. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So first question, what does it mean to do good while doing well?
Yeah, so about 13 years ago, somebody invited me to an angel investing meeting. And I was like, cool. What's that? I have no idea what you're talking about. I wasn't sure if we were going to talk about like the stock market or uh, stars in the sky. I had no idea, right? So we went to the first meeting and I found that there were entrepreneurs in my backyard. I was living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at the time, and I just had no idea that there was so much innovation and really amazing ideas happening because I was working in corporate America, kind of doing my thing, expecting the same or different results and kind of doing the same thing all the time. So it turned out that I realized that right in my own backyard was all this really cool innovation. And then I thought, well, that's neat, but I can't be a part of that because it's just for rich people and people on TV and things like that. And then I come to find out that there are nowadays, back then there weren't as many, but nowadays there are so many ways that people can get involved for just a little bit of money, a lot of money if they have it, but and they can also help entrepreneurs with their time. So then I thought to myself, well, okay, this is cool. And I like the idea of financial returns. I think everybody does. And that would be the doing well part. But like helping these entrepreneurs and being able to help get their innovation into the world is really the doing good part. And I thought, well, if I can do good and potentially make a financial return, then, ooh, now we're talking.
Yeah, and I think the thing you mentioned too, a lot of us might have in mind this idea of the skepticism around, well, that's not meant for me, or I can't do this, or it's only for fill in the blank type of people. So what was the thing, what was the moment during that, whether that conversation or later, that you realize, oh, this is accessible for more people than I originally thought?
Yeah, I think it wasn't necessarily right away because even when I was at the first meeting and they were talking about how like the group worked, that particular group worked, um, it was probably a couple years later when I was invited to be in a fund. And I was like, oh, what's a fund? That sounds neat. And it basically, I could make one investment. And instead of investing directly into an entrepreneurial company, which is the traditional way of investing, you could invest and have a fund manager kind of manage the money and invest in multiple companies. And I thought, well, that's pretty smart because I don't really have enough money to invest enough money in each company that it would financially make sense for a potential return. But if I could make one investment at the same level and potentially get exposure to like 10 companies, well, now I've just diversified myself, kind of like you hear about in the stock market. And I thought, well, this makes sense to me because now I could help multiple entrepreneurs, and I'm de-risking it a little bit because it is a risky asset class. It's illiquid, meaning that you can't really get your money back like you could if you bought a public stock. So there's a lot to it that after a while, I thought to myself, okay, there's some things here that I think are really interesting, but it's gotten a lot more interesting in the last couple of years.
What ways has it gotten a lot more interesting, would you say, in the last couple of years?
So back in the day, well, first of all, when I got invited into that fund, it was a much lower dollar amount than what was traditional. So when I first started in angel investing, if you wanted to be in a venture capital fund, which I not was not, but if you wanted to, you probably had to have like $250,000 to $1 million. I mean, it was cray cray money, right? And it was just absolutely not accessible to the average person. I think that's a lot of where the myth started to come from. So over the years, though, especially in the last like 8 to 10 years, there's been more of these funds that allow people to invest for a smaller dollar amount, maybe even $5,000 or $10,000, and still get exposure to all those companies. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. But then what about people who don't have that money either, and they're still wanting to be a part of it? Well, in 2016, the Securities and Exchange Commission, based on what happened with the Jobs Act when Obama was in office, they changed the rules. And now you can invest through what's called equity crowdfunding for as little as $50. So that is a game changer. So now you didn't have to be in this upper echelon of like, super rich people or whatever. And you could go onto a platform, and there's quite a few of them now, and you could look up different companies, and maybe you'd find one that met with your values or your goals, and you could make an investment. And in some cases, I would say the average is probably like $100 or $250. But when I looked at some statistics lately, I read that it's about an average check size of about $1,000 is what people are investing on, through these platforms. But it's a great way to also get some perks too. So if you remember like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, they'll help with an entrepreneur or somebody who wants to manufacture something. And you might have to wait like a long time to get it, but you'll be like one of the first. It was like kind of the cool thing to do. This has some of that also. It can in some cases, but you also are getting a small piece of ownership in the company. So I think that's cool because a lot of people then feel like, oh, I really want to help this company, not only because I like the product, I'm going to get to try it, but I also have this little piece of ownership too.
And it's investing in these companies, not so much about, this company is going to get acquired and, I'm going to make $1 million. They're going to be $1 billion company, that kind of motivation. Not saying there's anything wrong with that, but just for the purpose of distinction, is it more about, like you said, you care about this company or it aligns with your values, or you really want to support this particular entrepreneur or this class of entrepreneurs, et cetera? What is more the motivation of most people who become angel investors?
Oh, that's such a good question. You know why? Because everybody's answer is going to be a little bit different. And that's
Mm,
why I started my podcast called The Angel Next Door, because I was curious about that. I wanted to know, well, what made you want to be an angel investor, and where did you get money to be an angel investor? And what, do you use $200 or 200,000 or whatever? I just wanted to know. And
right.
so I started the podcast just by asking some of my angel friends, like, hey, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And it turns out that there are a lot of different answers. I think at the end of the day, all of us as angel investors want a financial return. Of course, we would love to see that billion-dollar thing happen, But the reality of me picking, the next Google, I don't know. If I was holding out hope for that and thinking that was my retirement strategy, that's probably bad. I would not recommend, right? But if I'm placing, investments with entrepreneurs that I really care about and I care about what they're doing and I care about advancing the type of work that they're doing and helping them, then I feel like that's a huge win. So again, you're not going to take all your money and invest it in this type of investment. You're going to take a really small portion and you're going to keep that. And this is what I write about in my book, Do Good While Doing Well, is I'm trying to tell people, look, you should think about this like you have this little bucket of money and you're going to carve out that, whatever that means to you. And then you can invest in, entrepreneurial companies, but keep in mind, it could take years for money to come back. So you have to be thinking about it like that. You can't think about it like, oh, my son is 15 and he has to go to college in 3 years. I'm going to use his college savings. No, do not do that. Okay.
Right. That is not what we're saying here.
Absolutely not. Right.
Right.
And again, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not giving financial advice, but I'm just saying if you are, sure that you need money, do not use that money. All right. This is like investable assets. You're going to carve out maybe at the Angel Capital Association, we always say like maybe 5-7%. Okay. And then you could take that though and spread it across the companies that really mean something to you. So for example, I'm really passionate about helping with women's health. I think that's an area that's been very underserved. And, women are not little men, right? So we need to have different types of healthcare.
Right.
Yeah. And same with people of color. They are not white people. So we're all different. We all
We're
have
all
different
different.
needs, all different, right? So lately, when I say lately, I really mean only in like the last 10, 20, 30 years, has have women and people of color even been in clinical trials. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So we need more of that. We need more focus on those types of companies. So I'm super passionate about that. And I always love to hear about the things that people are working on. And so to me, let's just say I invested in a company that really aligned with that for me. And then for some reason, that company didn't make it. Well, I don't know that I would feel bad. I mean, of course, I'd be like, oh, bummed, but you wouldn't necessarily feel bad if you knew that it advanced somehow, which it always does. And then usually that technology or the people that were working in that company, they go on to do other things too. So maybe you weren't the person who, made the windfall of money at that point, but you also in your heart that you helped to advance that and you helped to create jobs. I mean, so there's a lot of reasons behind it.
Other kinds of quote unquote payoff for it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. One of the things you mentioned earlier was that you were invited into this earlier fund. You might be doing something different now, but you were invited. So if I'm someone who's not invited and there are some, like you said, platforms and things nowadays, how do I either search for funds that I can be a part of, or are there platforms that you recommend that you've seen that you like? And I'll make sure for everyone, I'll put this in the notes and everything, but are there any that you would suggest if I wanted to invest in companies that, like you said, healthcare or women's healthcare or menopause is a big area. I don't know how specific you can be, but what are some platforms or funds that are?
Yeah. So what I usually tell people is, and when I say back then I was invited, what really was probably you had to be invited because there were so few of them.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's many, many more. But the one thing that I would tell people is, and this is what happened to me, I had no idea what was happening right in my own neighborhood, in my own, local community. And to me, that is where I've talked to a lot of people who have said, the local community really matters to me. So if I can support local entrepreneurs, I'd almost rather do that than, support somebody else. I mean, they may want to support other people too, but they really care about what's going on in their local community, which totally makes sense, right? So I think that people should just literally do an online search, just Google startup events in, and then just fill in your city or town. Find out what's happening in your own backyard, because that's when you're going to get connected to entrepreneurs. You're going to see what they're working on. If there are other investors in your town, which I'm sure there are, because there's entrepreneurs in every town, so they're always looking for investors. You'll find out about those types of things that are happening. There are some rules around solicitation, and you can't really just go online and Google for funds, because the SEC kind of frowns upon that. And so we just want to make sure that people, for me, it really makes sense for people to go and look at what's happening. Now, for just learning, I think it's great for people to be able to look at some of these equity crowdfunding platforms, which I talked about before. And you could literally, again, go to Google. I'm not recommending anything, but you could just go and search for what equity crowdfunding platforms. But there are three in particular that have the majority of the market share: WeFunder, Republic, and Start Engine. And I've had somebody from each of those organizations, usually the CEO, come on my podcast and explain what they are, because it is new and it is something that people aren't familiar with. And what I love about it, and actually I wrote a workbook that goes with my book, and in there I put an exercise that you could do totally free, and you could get your whole family involved if you wanted to. You do like a mock portfolio. So you just pick anyone. It doesn't matter what crowdfunding platform you look at. You could even look at Indiegogo or Kickstarter, anything. But just start to look at the different companies, look through their information, find the ones that really resonate with you, and then like pick 10 and just make a list on a piece of paper. Again, you've not used any money. But you could kind of make like a mock portfolio, and then you can start to see your own tendencies. Like, oh, I didn't realize it, but I guess I really care about, advancing technology or whatever it is, because you'll start to see a pattern on the things that resonate with you and the types of entrepreneurs that resonate with you. And the thing that I love about the equity crowdfunding platforms is they are regulated by the SEC. And everything that is said between any question between the company and an investor has to be on that platform. Even if I knew the CEO and he was like a friend of mine, or if I messaged them off the platform and asked a question, they really are not supposed to answer that at all, unless they put the question back on the platform so that everybody can see it. And I love that, because that means that people get to see not only what the company has put out there, but what are the questions that other investors are asking, and how is the company answering those questions, and how quickly too. And that's another thing. Like, the one thing that really irks me, one of my biggest pet peeves about entrepreneurs, and I do love them, I love you guys, but they sometimes will be very good at talking to you, giving you updates, telling you what's going on, until you become an investor. And then once you're an investor, they're like, okay, I'm off. I took the money, kind of took the money and ran. And now they're building the business, and they're not giving regular updates. And you're like, hello, where did you go? So on these platforms, not only do they have to answer all the questions up front, but they are required to give regular updates to the investors as well. So you do get a lot of information, and then you can start to see and learn just from this little, exercise that you could do right online.
Yes, and your book, Doing Good While Doing Well, everyone, is the book we're talking about here with Marcia. Excited to dive in more with that. And the workbook is an addition to the book, comes along with the book, or this particular
It's
exercise?
separate from the book, but everything can be found on Amazon or bookshop.org or Barnes & Noble, all the places.
Excellent. And I will say, in full transparency, as they say, I actually have used Start Engine, is where I invested in the app Fanbase.
Oh,
So
nice.
the social media, yes. And that was my first, I don't know how, it was my first time hearing about it, my first time knowing. I knew there were platforms and things out there, but this was the first brand or product that I saw on a platform. And I was like, oh, I can invest in this because, as you said, I believe in this. It's a social media app. It happens to be a Black founder, Isaac Hayes' son, actually. And has all the features that I like. I'm on the platform, but I just really believe in it as a space that's doesn't, what's the word, gatekeep your followers or that kind of thing, which we could have a whole other conversation about that on these other platforms. But anyway, like you said, it's something that you believe in, something that aligns with your values, something you think is good, of good service to the people that they serve, or whatever that thing is. And I not discovered, learned about Start Engine through hearing about that. And then I saw these other
Nice.
companies on there. So I hadn't heard of the other two you mentioned. We'll make sure we link to those. But that is one that I have, not endorsing, but have personally used. And like you said, the updates and things are good because you do kind of want to know, okay, now what's
Yeah,
happening?
like what
What happens
happened?
now? Yeah,
Yeah.
I might not make a billion off this, but I do want to know what's going on and that you guys are doing well. So that's good to hear. What would you say are some of the biggest mistakes, well, I'll say on both sides, that you've seen angel investors make and that you want to warn people about, and I'm sure you do in your book. And then on the other side of that, we mentioned about entrepreneurs making some mistakes, like the non-updates. Are there any other things that you want entrepreneurs to know so that angel investors would be interested and remain interested in their brands?
Yeah, oh, those are good questions. So I did, you're absolutely right. I did write the book because I made a ton of mistakes. And I thought to myself, I had to learn this kind of the hard way. And when I say hard way, I mean like lost some money. So
Mm-hmm.
let me see, what could I teach people that could help them not do that? And one of the things is I did not have a very clear like thesis or plan about what I was going to do. So remember I was talking about that bucket. Well, I didn't really say to myself, I'm going to have this bucket of money at the beginning and I'm going to use it until it's empty and when I won't make any more investments until the bucket gets refilled. So I'm probably a little over the 5% rule, which is not good. I always tell people, like, let's stay in your lane, stay in your boundaries, stay in your bucket, right? Um, so what I did is I created this thing called a halo strategy so that people could say, okay, and again, you could, from the exercise we were just talking about just seeing what you like, you can kind of get an idea like, well, what are the things I care about? Well, I really care about, curing diseases or whatever it is. And so you would write that down on it's just a one sheet. There's like 5 little boxes, easy. And then, well, maybe it's not easy because you really have to think about it. What do I care about? And then you have to like really start to, ask yourself these questions. But then you also think about, well, what are the things that I have that I could help an entrepreneur with? And in some cases, that might be money, but in other cases, it might not be. And that in some cases, it might be time. Like I could help them by volunteering, or I could help them by being an advisor. And sometimes advisors or board members end up getting compensated through, some type of options or shares or something like that. So there's that. And then the other part would be, well, how much time or how much money am I going to put toward this? So it's really just a super simple way to say, this is what I want to invest in. These are the types of companies I want to help. And then this is what I'm actually going to do. This is my plan. So if potential investors or current investors like kind of take that and use it, and actually you can download the worksheet right from my website, which is just my name, marciadawood.com. You can download it for free. So yes, it's in the book, but you can get your own copy and play with it right now if you want to. So I think that's important. But then when it comes to the entrepreneur side, the biggest problem I've seen, and I talk to entrepreneurs about this all the time, is they have a really hard time articulating the problem they're solving. And when I
Mm.
say that, I have entrepreneurs all the time that reach out to me and they're like, "Will you look at my pitch deck?" Or I'll look at a pitch deck for something else. And in the first couple slides, if I can't really understand what the problem is that they're solving, then I'm just kind of like, I don't get it. And I'm always the one who I have no problem raising my hand and saying, you know what, I really just don't understand exactly what problem you're trying to solve. Now they may have like a Rolls Royce or like Ferrari type of solution. It could be awesome. But if they're not solving a really big problem, people won't necessarily change their behavior or they won't necessarily use it. So, a good example was there was an entrepreneur who was telling me about his company, and they had some kind of a training program and for doctors or somebody in the medical field, doesn't matter. And he was explaining it and he's going on and on and on about how little there is about this training and yada yada. And so, I mean, on the surface, you could be like, okay, so the medical people need this training. But at the end of the day, I was like, well, isn't there training already out there? And he's like, oh, it's not as good as this train. I'm like, okay, why? So now I start asking more questions. So then I finally get down. It takes me like 30 minutes first just to try to figure out what they're talking about. But at the end of the day, I'm like, what exactly why did you even start the company? And then he starts to tell me, well, there was a problem because there were children that were sick and they weren't getting better. And then blah, 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 the training. And I was like, oh, okay. So now you have my attention because if there's a problem and people are sick, then yes, we want to fix that. But you didn't hook me with that. You were going on and on about your training. Like I was kind of like, I don't really care what your training's about. Like I don't get it.
Is
And
that more
then
like a starting with the
yeah, so
story
like
and
I'm like, you got to
the
start
product?
with the hook because
Right.
in all honesty, even if you are given 5 or 7 minutes to pitch to investors, a room of investors, you have our attention for probably like 30 to 90 seconds. And if you
Hmm.
haven't like hooked us with something like, we're saving babies or we're, gonna cure cancer, or whatever it is, right? If you aren't hooking us with that, then we're going to start thinking about, I wonder what we're having for dinner tonight. Or, like literally, we're going to lose our
Yeah.
attention, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's important. Like, ask yourself, ask your friends, talk to people. Like, do you really understand what I'm trying to do? Because that is where I see entrepreneurs kind of not get the attention that they should from investors at the opening. Because again, you're just trying as an entrepreneur to get a second meeting. You're never going to get an investor, or maybe, I mean, very few investors are going to say, I'm going to invest from a 5 minute presentation. That's not going to happen. But what you're trying for is for them to keep talking to you. You want the second meeting and the third meeting so that you can go through the diligence process and then potentially get investment.
That is such good advice. And maybe others have heard this, but this idea of thinking of it as you're trying to, of course, you're long term, you're likely trying to get the investment, but from the beginning, you're trying to, in that first meeting, you're trying to get the second meeting and
That's
you're trying to
right.
get that conversation to continue. Do you think it's also something of when you're presenting, like you said, you might have, well, you said the Rolls Royce of ideas, but even the Rolls Royce of presentations. Sometimes
Oh,
I've
yeah.
been on calls, I'm not an investor in that way, but I've been on calls like as a consultant for other people and it's like the presentation is beautiful and awesome and it looks amazing and bravo video, they've got all kinds of things. And at the end, it's like, now what exactly is so even though
Yes.
it's like that is pretty, but tell
Yes.
me exactly what problem you're solving. So as you said too, our time attention span is already shortened just because life, like everything's coming at us, etc. But if you're presenting something super complicated, it's probably even shorter,
That's right.
right? So it's like
Yep.
like you said, that first, even whether you've got a 5 minute, 10 minute, 30 minute meeting, think about, as Marcia said, those first 90 seconds. What are
Yep.
you going to tell me that makes me kind of sit up or at least stay with you? Otherwise, people just start drifting. Doesn't
Yep.
matter how much. Yeah, that's very good. And is it a complicated, like, what do they say? Complicated fails, uh, simple sells, complicated fails, or something like that. Like, keep it simple.
Yes.
Sometimes it's too complicated too.
Yes. I can give you another good example. So there was a woman who was presenting and she did an awesome job, but she had some kind of a heart valve or again, I'm not a scientist, so like forgive me. But it was something that it was very technical and it was like the new mousetrap for heart valves, right? And instead of starting off by, hey, I've got this heart valve and it's like super great, she starts off with the statistics of how many people are dying of heart disease. And then she like basically goes into here are the ways that it could be prevented. But let's say that somebody does end up being lucky enough to make it into the OR, they're not able to, they either are dying on the table or something bad's happening because of this, blah 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 isn't there. And now woohoo, here I am with the new heart valve or whatever it was. And I was like, oh, I get, like, now she has my attention because I didn't know that there were that many people. Like, I mean, just whatever your problem is that you're solving, like, know the numbers, know the statistics, how many people are affected by it, how many people unfortunately pass away from, whatever it is. Like, just know that, because that's powerful. And that is the stuff that as investors, we're like, oh no, we want to stop that. We don't want those bad things to happen. Or you could be like, my mom unfortunately passed away from ALS. So anytime somebody's talking to me about a treatment, there's no treatment right now for ALS. So, how do you start to realize, like, and help the people? That's what you really want to do.
Yes, I'm sorry to hear about your mom with ALS.
Mm,
My
sorry.
brother passed away from ALS in 2018. Yeah.
Wow, we're like
Yes,
we're like siblings.
I know. I
I know, when you have
know.
a
It's a
when you have
terrible.
a loved one who has that horrible, horrible disease, and there is nothing you can do except watch them suffer. Ugh,
Exactly.
it's
And they
awful.
know the thing is they still have
They
their mind,
know.
so they know
Yes.
that they're suffering. Yes. So that's a it's a sad situation, as we both know, but a great example too of like this would be something that someone might be passionate about investing in if someone presents like this
Yes.
is a disease, has no cures, this many people are affected by it. This is what I have to solve this
Yeah.
big problem. And that's one of the things you talk about in your book. Like the angel investing is a way for you to have social impact, to invest in companies or entrepreneurs who are just in their own way tackling these big problems that we care about.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
sometimes things like, I think one of the examples I saw you mentioned, like climate change, seems,
Yeah.
well, it is a big deal, right? But it's so massive. How do I, as a little person here by myself, contribute or be
Right.
a part of this? This is a
Yes.
way of, right? Maybe someone else is already doing something to at least try to tackle or make a dent in this problem.
That's right.
Yes.
100%.
So would you say that for women entrepreneurs especially, is angel investing or looking for angel investors a good route to funding because only, what is it, less than 3% of funding goes to women entrepreneurs?
Ooh, that's a good question. In some cases, it could be. However, like for example, between 2022 and even now, it still hasn't gotten much better. It is a very, very hard funding environment. 2020, 2021, believe it or not, even though we were in the middle of the pandemic, there was a lot of capital flowing, especially in the later stages where like venture capital money is in the bigger dollars, the bigger fish were, putting out a lot of capital to companies. And so it's been very, very hard for anybody to fundraise, but women, especially, and people of color, it's 10 times worse. It's extremely hard because there aren't enough. There's a couple reasons. One, there are not enough people that look like the people we want funded writing the checks. So we need to get more people kind of in the game, which is really probably like, if I had to summarize, like, what is it that I'm out here trying to do by writing the book, having the podcast, it is to get more people in the game so that we can help get funding to all of the things that we want to see in the world, all the innovation, no matter who it is that is doing it or working on it. And so that really does matter, though, because like I've heard from women who were working on something that had to do with women's healthcare. They went into a room of white men to pitch, and they would basically not get any investment. And when they finally would like really pressure them to say, hey, why, well, we don't really want to talk about what you're doing because ew,
Mm,
like,
right.
or my wife doesn't have that problem, so I really don't think that what you're talking about is a big problem. We're like, yeah, right, your wife just isn't telling you she has the problem, right? So
Exactly. Or you're not listening and you
you're
don't
not
care that she has the
listening.
problem.
Yes, that's exactly right. So there's a lot of that, and so that's a problem. And then another reason too is I think that as terrible as it is, it's almost like women have to be they have to be even more confident in their numbers. They have to be more confident in what they're doing because its studies have shown, and there was a study done by Donna Kanzi out of Columbia University. I talk about it all the time. It's in my book too,
Mhm.
where the questions that get asked to men are really promotional questions. Oh, how do you think you're going to grow your revenues, next year? But the questions that get asked to women are prevention questions. Things like, well, how are you expecting not to have so many losses next year? It's kind of the same question, but it's phrased very differently.
Very different. Yes.
So, those types of things. And I think if women can be aware of that because the biases are in men and women. Like I'm definitely not, bashing men here. Like we all have inherent biases. But if women as entrepreneurs who are pitching, and so if anybody, any female entrepreneurs who are listening right now, if you don't get anything else out of this episode, take this. All right. If you answer said prevention question with a promotion type of answer. So let's say that somebody asks that question, well, how are you going to not have losses next year or whatever it is? If you turned it around and said, well, I plan to grow my revenues by blah, 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 and then all of a sudden your answer is very promotional based and like an on more optimistic upbeat of what's going to happen that's going to be growing the business, you will in their mind, subconscious mind, you will have changed that prevention now to a promotion. And that has actually, her study showed that that helped.
That has helped. Okay. This
Mhm.
was like a cliffhanger, not a cliffhanger, suspense movie as you were telling. I was thinking, does it help? Does it not help?
Oh,
Which
no,
side are
it
we supposed to come
helps.
out on? It helps
Hmm.
because you change the
Because you
conversation
change the
or the
conversation.
thinking.
They're
Yes.
thinking, yeah, because now you're
Very
in that
interesting.
position of strength and you're saying, hey,
Strength.
no, and I'm answering with a promotion, kind of answer. So, yeah.
Very good. And that's in your book as well.
Mm-hmm.
The good
Yep.
stuff and doing good while doing well. It's
Yeah.
interesting. One other conversation I had on the same panel I was thinking of, where it was these women entrepreneurs, they happen to be women of color entrepreneurs. Simple thing, there was some technology problems in the beginning with when they were trying to pull up their presentations and that kind of thing. And every single person, I think maybe except for one, spent so much time apologizing.
Oh,
And as you
yes.
I know. And it was, I didn't mind, but there was all kinds of different people on the call. And I started, like, maybe the empathy started feeling nervous, like, oh my gosh, you're starting from a place of weakness.
That's
Whether that's
right.
true or not, but just in the mind, that's the first thing I thought of. Things go wrong, things happen. Maybe say, oh, can you just give me a sec? Let me figure this out or whatever it is. But sorry, I'm so sorry. Sorry about this. And it was like 5 minutes. It felt like, it probably was 30 seconds, but it felt like
Right.
5 minutes of apologies. And then you're jumping into your presentation.
Right.
So it's sad that you have to be aware of that, but I believe as women, you do have to be aware of how am I showing up as powerfully as possible.
Yeah. In that
Yeah.
case, you know what I would advise entrepreneurs to do is you always have to be ready with no tech. So
Yes.
if
Yes.
something happens and you can't get the tech to work in the first like 4 seconds or whatever allotment of time you're given,
Yes.
just ditch the technology and just speak to your audience, whoever it is. You probably only have 5 or 7 minutes anyway, and you should just
Yes.
have the four big bullet points that you'd want to talk about. And if you practice that, you can get good enough that people will be listening to you and they'll be enthralled with what you're saying because you're telling them a story about the problem that you're solving, and there you go. And you didn't even need the tech. I worry that entrepreneurs, especially women, tend sometimes to use the tech as a crutch. They're
Yeah.
using
Become
it.
too dependent on it.
They get too
Yes.
dependent on it. They worry, oh, I can't talk. I couldn't talk about it without the slides. But yes, you can. You can ditch
Yes,
the
you
slides.
can.
Hmm.
Yes, and I think that's such great advice because what if the slides don't work? As
That's
in
right.
this example, it was just something was going on with Zoom that day and Canva, nothing was working. So it wasn't even just one person. So it
That's right.
might not be your fault, might not be anything, but how can you talk about it as opposed because then those people ended up running out of time during their
Yes.
presentation because they were pulling so much of the tech. So if you could say, Marcia, one thing that you want to make sure listeners get from this conversation or this idea about doing good while doing well, what's something you want to make sure that they know and take away with them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good that's going on out there. And while charities are amazing, and I am a huge fan of donating to charity, I do donate to charity, but the amount of funding that's going to charitable organizations, the amount of annual charitable giving in the United States is $475 billion. dollars. 475 billion. That's a lot of money. However,
Wow.
that is equivalent to 1% of the value of the US stock market. So think about that for a minute. The US stock market is publicly traded companies. There are many, 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 many more private companies. So think about how many for profit companies are out there working on innovation, working on change. If we are going to put the burden all on these poor nonprofits to save the world, that isn't fair. We actually need to work together with the for-profit companies so that we can start to get even more money to the nonprofit companies. It doesn't, I don't, this mindset of like there's charities and there's investing and they're so far apart from each other drives me crazy because it shouldn't be like that. We should all be working together toward these goals that we want to see. But we cannot rely on that. And we need to make sure that they know about that and they know that, hey, I can be a part of this too. And let me see how I can just take the first step. And the first step would just be find out what's going on in your local community.
Is the local Chamber of Commerce a good resource too when I'm looking for what's going on locally
Absolutely. Yeah. Because they
for
usually know
businesses?
like if there's a local angel group or they know if there are things called accelerators or incubators, which is where entrepreneurs go when they just have an idea and they're trying to figure out, well, how am I going to build this? There's usually those are in almost every city, every town. So you could find out what's going on through that. But yeah, the Chamber of Commerce would definitely know.
Excellent. Marcia, thank you. Please tell everyone where they can find you, how we can get in touch with you. I'll have links, of course, to all the resources we talked about, but how do they find out more about you and your book?
Yeah, I would say just go to my website, marciadawood.com. I have a lot of information there about my podcast. My podcast started as what I said, basically getting to know about how people became angel investors. But then I started to realize that entrepreneurs wanted to hear like, well, how do people really do equity crowdfunding? So I brought on a couple entrepreneurs that have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars on equity crowdfunding sites also because I wanted to make sure that angel investors knew what that was all about. But using philanthropic dollars in order to invest in a for-profit company is a big thing that I talk about. All of these things are on the website, and I have them actually put into like playlists. So if people are like, oh, I really want to know about this one thing, they can just go click on and they can see all the podcast episodes that relate to that. Because sometimes it's hard. You're on Apple Podcasts or whatever you listen, Google,
Oh, it's
whatever,
impossible.
Spotify.
You're
It's
being
like,
kind. It's impossible.
it's impossible. You almost have
Yeah.
to have playlists. And I found myself like talking to people and they'd be like, "Oh, wait a minute, which episodes is that? Wait, that sounds really interesting. I want to hear about that." And then I'd be like, "Oh, well, it was like a couple episodes ago, so you have to go." And then they're like, too much. I can't. I
Right.
can't take it, right?"
Right.
And so I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to make this super simple for people." And it's all on my website by category. And then the
That's
book is
great.
on
Brilliant.
there. Yeah, the workbook. And then there's a whole bunch of free stuff too. You can actually download the first chapter of the book if you want to read it for free, that kind of stuff. I try to make it easy.
Amazing. And I saw you had a wonderful endorsement from Mel Robbins.
Yeah, right on the cover. Yay.
Yes, looks great. Excellent. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. It's something that I'm passionate about. Women entrepreneurs, knowing how to invest, empowering women in leadership to know what they can do with their dollars in a way that has social impact. So thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.